Dan Christensen of Florida Bulldog, the most prominent 9/11 reporter in the United States, has another article that came out today regarding the current status of the lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from Creedler and Creedler. And it's now in the hands of George Daniels from the Southern District of New York. So let's get right to it. It's make or break time for 9/11 families' lawsuits. Saudis seek dismissal despite overwhelming evidence. Now, this would also be very contradictory to the Saudi foreign minister, Jubair, who basically said previously and times before that the Saudis welcome the declassification of any documents from the Department of Justice showing any complicity or any type of support network existing within the Saudi kingdom to the 9/11 hijackers. The arguments are in, and now it's up to a federal judge in New York City to decide whether the momentous civil lawsuit against Saudi Arabia against the 9/11 wounded and families of the 2,977 dead lives or dies, right? The kingdom's essential arguments in its public statements and motion to dismiss are simple. We had nothing to do with Al Qaeda's September 11th jetliner attacks on New York and Washington. And even if we did, every legal claim against us should be dismissed because we are a sovereign nation and American courts have no jurisdiction over us. Seems to me that when the feet got to the fire, they want to pull out now, right? I mean, before, Jubair and other Saudi dignitaries have basically told, from people like President Biden to Secretary of State Antony Blinken to William Barr, who was a former Secretary of State under the Trump administration, who helped classify these files under the pretense of national security. Now the Saudi kingdom is saying, well, you know what? We don't want this lawsuit to continue. And that's because to the latest revelations, which are the Canestraro documents, which actually were classified material read by former congressional officials, CIA and FBI officials who have saw material and said that, yay, wait a minute, it does seem that there was an illegal covert operation headed by the CIA, headed by the Saudi General Intelligence Directorate, also known as the Mahabeth, which basically showed that they were providing logistical and financial support to the first two hijackers inside the United States that were known to CIA and NSA as Al Qaeda operatives in Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. And, listen, huge thank you to Dan Christensen of the Florida Bulldog, who has been just a bulldog himself regarding reporting the latest news surrounding the Saudi kingdom and the CIA and the Southern District of New York, the court cases involved. And they're the only ones doing it. They're the only ones providing updates on this. The legacy media has not. And we should be expecting this, right? We shouldn't, because they work for us. Aren't they supposed to be the fifth column, right? No, they're not. They're just corporate lackeys who are basically just bullhorns for the intelligence services, the Pentagon, the State Department, right? The federal government in multi-layers. Dan Christensen deserves a lot of credit. And for those who are not subscribed to his Florida Bulldog channel on Twitter and elsewhere, please subscribe because they're doing a civic duty, an invaluable civic duty. The plaintiffs say they have assembled overwhelming evidence that, in fact, Saudi government officials and agents comprised an essential support network for pro-jihadist extremists, including the first arriving 9/11 hijackers, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. That evidence is sufficient under the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, also known as JASTA, the 2016 federal law that allowed Americans to sue foreign countries that provide direct or indirect support for terrorists to overcome Saudi Arabia's claim of sovereign immunity, they say. Al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar, who entered the United States through Los Angeles International Airport on January 15 of 2000, were two of the muscle hijackers who were later aboard Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. The record about them was developed, court papers say, through the court process of legal discovery and documents obtained about the FBI's once secret investigation of possible Saudi involvement in 9/11, codenamed Operation Encore. The existence of Encore was first discovered by Florida Bulldog during a Freedom of Information litigation against the Department of Justice in 2016. Several thousand pages of Encore documents were later declassified and released pursuant to an executive order by Biden in 2021. I think that was Executive Order 010410, I believe, or something to likened to it. And I finally finished the 14,000 pages of Operation Encore. It took about a year and a half, but it was done, and there was some pretty illuminating discoveries in which I'm actually going to be reading some of those in a playlist that I'm making on my channel, which is the Operation Encore playlist. Saudi's two-page motion to dismiss was filed last October by its lawyers at Washington, D.C. law firm Kellogg, Hanson, Todd, Figel, and Frederick. Its separate supporting memorandum of law of 75 pages was filed under seal, but a redacted version was made public last Friday on May 10th. The plaintiff's 71-page in opposition filed Tuesday on May 7th by a trio of law firms representing many thousands of individuals is in some ways a truncated update to the 9/11 Commission report published in 2004. For example, 9/11 Commission was unable to determine whether what al-Hazmi and al-Midar did or where they stayed during the first 2 weeks after their arrival at Los Angeles International Airport on January 15, 2000. Remember, you had leading staff executive Dieter Snell, who basically said that the 9/11 Commission had no idea where Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi stayed for the first 2 weeks. Well, through Operation Encore, we now find that they were staying in a hotel room that was rented by Fahad al-Dumeri, the imam at the King Fahd Mosque. And it was known to the FBI. It was known to the 9/11 Commission, but they basically covered up any Saudi involvement. The FBI determined that witness testimony confirmed that the pair went immediately to the King Fahd Mosque in nearby Culver City, where Fahad al-Dumeri was the imam by appointment of the Saudi government through Muassad al-Jarrah. For the next 2 weeks, al-Midar and al-Hazmi were put under the care of Muhammad Johar, whose family was close to Dumeri. Johar looked after the hijackers' every need, including housing, transportation, and day-to-day living requirements. The motion stated that Johar admitted in his deposition to being relieved when they moved to San Diego, given how demanding they were of him. Johar testified that he did not see the hijackers or interact with anyone outside other than himself and Dumeri during this period. Another example is evidence plaintiffs received from London's Metropolitan Police Service, including the complete version of videotape of a party for the future hijackers al-Midar and al-Hazmi that was shot by Kaysan bin Don, an associate of Omar al-Bayoumi. At the San Diego apartment in early 2000, the tape was found among the belongings of Saudi spy Omar al-Bayoumi when the MPS raided the residence shortly after 9/11. The complete party video is different from a version the FBI produced to the plaintiffs, and the duration and content of the complete video showed that it was also different and more complete than the one the FBI provided to the 9/11 Commission, the motion said. An analysis confirmed the party was organized by Omar al-Bayoumi and his collaborators to introduce the hijackers to a carefully curated group of like-minded community members and religious leaders who could be trusted to look after the hijackers and cocoon them in a protective support network. That they provided housing, they provided financial support to both of these men who could not speak English, who didn't know how to get a driver's license. That was provided to by Anwar al-Awlaki, who later would be an imam at a mosque in Virginia, Falls Church, Virginia, and that's where later al-Bayoumi, al-Midar and al-Hazmi would travel to, along with Hani Hanjour. Hani Hanjour actually replaced al-Midar and al-Hazmi as the pilots for 77. Remember, for those who don't know, the pilots for Flight 77 were supposed to be al-Midar and al-Hazmi, but because they couldn't speak English and they failed the English classes, they could not go to flight lessons. In came Hani Hanjour. Further, There were also intriguing new details in the motion about the casing video Bayoumi is said to have made of the U.S. Capitol. That video, whose existence only became public last winter, was seized by London police. According to the motion, Omar al-Bayoumi narrated the video for an audience he addressed as his esteemed brothers. In the video, Bayoumi surveyed the U.S. Capitol at length and repeatedly orients the Capitol to other surrounding landmarks, and especially the Washington Monument, the highest landmark in Washington, and carefully films and notes the Capitol structural features, entrances, and security posts. Bayoumi makes remarks throughout the reflecting hostility to the West in Congress, including the senators who make all the decisions. The plaintiff's motion also described the web of alleged terrorist connections among various Saudi officials from the country's Minister of Islamic Affairs working inside the United States and their cohorts, Omar al-Bayoumi and Fahad al-Tameri, a Saudi consular affairs officer and religious leader in Los Angeles. Omar al-Bayoumi and Fahad al-Tameri are prescribed in a 2012 Encore document released to Florida Bulldog in 2016 as having been tasked with helping the two hijackers by Muwassid al-Jarrah. That's this guy, the deputy head of the Islamic affairs at the Saudi embassy in Washington. Now, I'll break the network down to you. From what I gathered in Operation Encore, the head of this operation involving the Saudi intelligence, involving providing logistical and support to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi goes as follows. Muwassid al-Jarrah, the head of the Ministry of Islamic Affairs in Washington, D.C. He's in charge of providing imams all throughout the United States. And these imams are Wahhabi clerics. Wahhabi is the doctrine that is creating the mindset for groups like Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and regional terrorist networks like Jemaah Islamiyah, the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and Abu Sayyaf and Boko Haram, and As-Sahab in Africa. These are not Islamic groups. This is a branch of Islam that doesn't exist. The Prophet Muhammad does not refer to Wahhabis. It was founded by Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, who's a nomad, who went against the principles in the Quran and abrogated certain scriptures within the Quran. He followed the teachings of a hadith scholar in Ibn Taymiyyah. And so you have Muwassid al-Jarrah, and then his associates from Saudi Arabia, Mu'tab al-Sideri and Adel al-Sadhan. These two men would act as the eyes and ears of Muwassid al-Jarrah as they would go throughout the United States. Mainly, these two men went to Los Angeles and San Diego to oversee whether or not Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were getting what they were supposed to be getting, which is logistical and financial support. Now, who's providing the support? Omar al-Bayoumi, Fahad al-Tameri, Osama Basnan were the three major people providing funding to Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. Then you have other associates like Qasim bin Dan, al-Jofar, the individual named in this article, and Anwar al-Awlaki. So that's how the branch effect worked regarding the Saudi nexus. Now, this article doesn't mention the other nexus, which is taboo, which is the Israeli nexus. But that's outlined in the Gerald Shea Memorandum. And if you haven't, please go to that playlist, which I'll provide in the description, and you'll get to understand how that nexus worked. And that nexus is much more secretive. In the Saudis' memorandum of law, the lawyers write that neither Omar al-Bayoumi nor Fahad al-Tameri knowingly assisted the hijackers, and that their work for Saudi Arabia had nothing to do with helping terrorists. They also assert that there is no evidence that Saudi Arabia operated an extremist MOI enterprise. Now, that's not true. because from what we know through Operation Encore, that there was an informant for the FBI who actually heard a phone call between a person in Malaysia, which would be Taufik bin Atash, also known as Khalad, and to Fahad al-Dameri, the imam at the Kikfa Mosque. And what he heard was the person on the other end of the line telling him that there was going to be two brothers to be received inside the United States. Not actual brothers, but Islamic brothers. Now, this is in December of 1999, mind you. This is before the meeting in Malaysia, the high-level summit that was being watched by the CIA and Malaysian authorities. So the tracking of Khalid Ahmed Ardawat began even long before, many years prior to the meeting in Malaysia. The NSA knew this, the CIA knew this, because they were tracking bin Laden's satellite phones from the early 90s. And they they saw that a phone number kept calling it, and bin Laden kept calling it. Who is his number? Well, it was traced to a house in Yemen. This house in Yemen was owned by Ahmed al-Hada. Ahmed al-Hada was an associate of Osama bin Laden. Are you following me here? This house became a communications network for al-Qaeda all throughout the world. So al-Qaeda in Syria, al-Qaeda in Egypt, whose phones were being tapped by the intelligence services, headed by socialist governments that were repressing Islamic jihadists. The only good thing about socialist governments in these countries, right? They have their own problems. But al-Qaeda in these countries would pass a coded network or a letter or a phone call to this house in Yemen, who would then transfer that note or that decrypted code phone call to whoever they wanted to contact anywhere in the world. So the NSA knew this in 1996. The CIA knew this in 1996. That's 5 years prior to 9/11. Imagine what they heard on those phone calls. Just imagine. Now, you have information prior to an operation. You can now manipulate that operation. This is what I've been trying to tell you for years. This is the crux of 9/11. This is it. And not just 9/11, but the USS Cole bomb and the bombing of the East Africa embassies and the Millennium Network, the Millennium Plot. I mean, goodness gracious, this is it right here. This is the meat and potatoes. So now you have a Saudi network. You have an Israeli network that were operating inside the United States, monitoring who? Everybody involved with 9/11. Everybody. All the muscle hijackers, all the pound hijackers. Not only that, you have the CIA, the NSA providing what? Intelligence that they hoarded. They never shared with anybody. Now, what did they have? I don't know. I don't know if they had specifics. But I would submit to you that they have enough information to where they could have stopped 9/11. Now, the former senior executive of the NSA, Thomas Drake, even said that the NSA alone, just them alone, had enough information that if it was read or if it was read and wasn't shared, could have stopped 9/11 altogether just based on their information alone, outside of any agency. Now, you could just imagine how much information these intelligence services had. It would be enormous. And that's how the 9/11 attacks were successful. It's not that they, later on, the directors of the NSA, Michael Hayden and George Tenet of the CIA and Robert Mueller, the FBI, they all complained to the commission. We didn't have enough manpower. We didn't have enough information. They had everything, but they just didn't share it. And neither one was willing to put the boot to the neck. They wanted to pass the buck. Hey, they didn't get everything, they didn't provide everything, but we're not going to kill you. Because they all work really in tandem. But just, you have interagency fighting. This is the reason why they didn't share information to begin with, right? Now, just imagine the foreign intelligence services of Saudi Arabia and Israel, who were actually on the ground inside the United States, living nearby these people, even with the hijackers, like the Saudis were. What do you think they got out of them? I'll give you an example. These guys weren't very careful. For example, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hadmi, right? Nawaf al-Hadmi worked at a car wash called Sam's Stark Mart, washing cars and whatnot. And according to the FBI, they interviewed the employees there. And what they told them was the Nawaf al-Hadmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar basically said to one person, in about a month, watch the news. Something big and spectacular is going to happen against the United States. It's not like they were secret about what was going on. So that's how the network of intelligence works. Sorry to go on a little bit of a rant there, but I want you to understand the amount of information these intelligence services had, and that this crux of 9/11 is hardly ever talked about by anyone. And the people that did talk about this, like Paul Thompson and Kevin Fenton and Kyle Hentz, they're all gone. Ray Nowosiski, John Duffy, the very few people are bringing attention to this. I am, DJ Thermal Detonator is, and now the new kids on the block, like Sean Russell and Darren Harvey and Ben and Eric and Jonathan Bellasord. I'm proud of those guys, because this is it. If you want to backbreak 9/11, if you want to know who had and who didn't have information, this is it right here. Pre-intelligence 9/11. One other Saudi official received special attention in 9/11 plaintiff's motion. Ismail Mara, a consular officer for the Islamic Affairs in Los Angeles, is alleged to have been part of the essential support network for pro-jihadist extremists that included the future 9/11 hijackers. Like other of the MOIA operatives, Mara was a virulent extremist who was close to Thumeri, the motion says. The Saudis dispute that too, saying Mara was a contract employee at the consulate whose primary duty was a translator. Mara has never been involved with terrorists and condemned the 9/11 attacks as Saudi Arabia's memorandum of law. He had never heard the hijackers' names before the attacks and did nothing to assist them. That kind of back and forth is a frequent, but it is in a section dubbed Saudi Arabia's narrative is unbelievable that the plaintiff's case is mostly strikingly understood, right? It contends the kingdom's arguments are anchored in an utterly implausible theory, predicated on a series of unbelievable coincidences. Saudi Arabia posits that al-Qaeda deployed al-Hadmi al-Mihdhar to the United States with no advanced plans for assistance. And then by pure happenstance, they were immediately to the precise mosque that was the Saudi government's established receiving point in California for extremists linked to al-Qaeda. At that mosque, which just happened to be headed by an extremist propagated with deep ties to terrorism, al-Hadmi al-Mihdhar had the good fortune to secure immediate assistance and housing from a congregation member whose family was close to al-Thumeri and the consular world officials Mohammed Jafar, who Saudi Arabian theorizes were met by pure chance. Fortunately for the hijackers, Johar was willing to dedicate himself and go to extraordinary lengths to accommodate and support them during their 2 weeks in Los Angeles. Johar is relieved from this burden, in Saudi Arabia's telling, when the lightning bolt of coincidence strikes again and the hijackers go to a restaurant in Los Angeles to meet Omar al-Bayumi, who lives in San Diego, but happens to be in Los Angeles that day. At a restaurant that is called the Mediterranean Cafe that sold halal meat. Meanwhile, on that Venice Boulevard, you have dozens and dozens of restaurants all up and down Venice Boulevard. And I looked at the old Google Maps, and the small little Mediterranean Cafe didn't stick out. But these two hijackers would go there and meet Omar al-Bayumi, who by chance pays their rent for the first 3 months, but has never done that for any parishioner at the King Fahd Mosque ever before, because the FBI asked about them too. Has Omar al-Bayumi provided financial and logistical support to any of the members of the King Fahd Mosque? And everyone said no. He was very frugal with his money. That's right, folks. I don't believe in coincidences myself. I'm not a coincidence theorist. This chance encounter occurs immediately after Omar al-Bayumi happens to have a private meeting with Mana at the consulate and then stopped at the King Fahd Mosque. According to Kaysan bin Don, who was with Omar al-Bayumi that day, said he met with Fahad al-Thumeri for an hour. and then they drove to the restaurant. The terrorist's remarkably good fortune continues when Omar al-Biruni strikes up a conversation with the hijackers and happens to mention that he lives in San Diego. The precise city of al-Qaeda leadership had designated as the best location for them to settle and begin the attack preparations. Without hesitation, the hijackers pack up and embark for San Diego 2 days later, where they were again, by pure coincidence, run into Omar al-Biruni, who, according to Saudi Arabia, never encouraged them to relocate to San Diego and never offered to help them in any way. This is especially fortunate for the terrorists, as al-Biruni is immediately available and amenable to go to extraordinary lengths to get them settled in San Diego, including securing housing in the apartment complex that Omar al-Biruni lives in, and assumed legal and financial responsibilities by co-signing their lease and providing funds just below the suspicious activity reporting threshold of $9,900. Remember, $10,000 deposit is investigated by the IRS to help them open a bank account. $9,900. The plaintiffs argued that the hijackers' look was amplified when Omar al-Biruni hosted a party at their apartment, which happened to be attended by a radical cleric who is the European leader of an al-Qaeda affiliate. All of this sheer luck leads to the hijackers' seamless settlement to San Diego and the provision of their support that precisely required to commence their attack preparations. By another remarkable coincidence, and as a raid of al-Biruni's immediate apartment in the United Kingdom after the attacks revealed, Biruni had prepared and was in possession of a drawing of a plane, alongside the calculation used to discern the distance at which a target on the ground would be visible from a certain altitude. It was a notebook, and I did a separate episode on this. It's on my old YouTube channel, which I'll upload to the new one soon enough. The raid also uncovers a videotape, which was narrated by Biruni, in which he surveyed the U.S. Capitol. Again, the kingdom assures that this is an innocent explanation for why these items were in possession of its agent, which provided early and essential assistance to al-Qaeda members who were tasked to use a plane as a weapon and navigate to its targets on the ground, including U.S. Capitol specifically. Now, we'll see what comes from New York City District Judge George Daniels, what he thinks. To date, he's shown skepticism about the plaintiff's case, even dismissing Saudi Arabia in 2015. That action prompted Congress to pass JASTA and override President Obama's veto in 2016. You know, the more I think about it, Obama is a piece of shit and probably the second, easily the second worst president of my lifetime, with Bush being number one, Bush Jr. Obama is two, probably Biden three, right? Obama, my God, what could I say about the presidency? I'm not going to go on, but look at that. You know, here, this victims' families who by at that time were led by James Creedler of Creedler and Motley Rice, were suing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and what's it called? JASTA was enacted, and Obama wanted to veto it. Wanted to veto the JASTA Act, the ability for the victims' families to sue Saudi Arabia for their role in 9/11. Obama, a U.S. president, was going to veto that. And you wonder why I'm critical of some of you people that vote. Here's one example. Obama is a traitor to this country. So is Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump ran on the premise, one of them was that he was going to solve 9/11. He was going to illuminate some evidence, but he never did. He's a liar, just like every other president. And his Secretary of State, William Barr, basically, the Attorney General William Barr basically said that I'm classifying materials relating to the case as national security. So much for America first. It's important then to keep in mind that every scrap of information 9/11 plaintiffs' lawyers have developed to date is about what happened in Southern California before the attacks. That's the only place that Daniels allowed them to conduct discovery. Thus, their lawyers have yet to examine what happened in other locations where the hijackers are known to have lived or visited, including Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Sarasota counties in Florida, Phoenix, Arizona, suburban Washington, D.C., northern New Jersey, Boston, Massachusetts, and Portland, Maine. All of these cities have huge indexes of history regarding pre-9/11. And, you know, with Phoenix, Arizona, of course, that, you know, I've interviewed the lead agent there, Ken Williams, about the Phoenix memo, where you have Islamic militants training to fly at flight schools, where there are more flight schools in Scottsdale, Arizona than anywhere in the United States. Sarasota counties, which is led by the Al-Hijaj family, who basically received a number of the pilot hijackers at parties at their house. Boston, Massachusetts. This is going to be huge. Boston, Massachusetts, where Logan Airport International Airport was. Portland, Maine. This is a conspiracy, right? Why did Muhammad Atta and Abdul Rahman Al Omari, right? Why did they go to Portland, Maine on September 10th? Why would they go there outside of Logan Airport all the way up to Portland unless it was really important? Now, according to the 9/11 Commission, they don't know why they went up there, but it seems strange that they would because they almost missed their flight. So it had to be important why they would go there. Me and DJ Thermal Detonator think that that's where the additional hijackers were. Remember, they find the list of hijackers in Atta's car. But was it just 19 or was it more? Well, later on, we find out that there were attempted hijackings of planes. One of them in which TMZ, of all people, TMZ, not you, NBC, not you, Fox or CNN. It was fucking TMZ that broke the case. Now, me and DJ Thermal Detonator were one of the very few people in the country to report about Flight 23 even before TMZ broke the story. And that was about the hijacking of Flight 23, because we believe 9/11 was supposed to follow in the same line of Bajinka plot. That's where the idea of 9/11 came from, because the two people that created Bajinka plot, which was an international plot of getting 10 planes and crash them all over the United States, as well as having 12 planes outfitted with bombs and have them all blow up, which would have made 9/11 seem like a distant memory. Bajinka was a huge operation that was going to kill many tens of thousands, right? The people who created the Bajinka plot were the creator of the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, Ramzi Youssef, and his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, where he got the idea of 9/11 to come from. In the 9/11 plaintiffs and avoid dismissal, the limits on their discovery will drop away, and they'll be entitled to subpoena records from the FBI and other agencies about what went on in those locations. During Florida Bulldog's FOI litigation, the Department of Justice disclosed that the FBI's Tampa field office alone had an excess of 80,000 pages of classified records about 9/11. 80,000. 80,000. Just in fucking Tampa. It will also turn up the heat on King Salman and his son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to settle the case to stop the steady drip of new facts coming from the court's docket. That's right. As time keeps on, declassified material will keep pouring out. Now, Saudi Kingdom can't afford this, right? The cost to do that would be in the billions. Whoever wins, an appeal of Judge Daniels' ruling is likely. And what we hope for is that Daniels will make the right decision and go forward with this case, because it's a case of the people. And the people that I will serve are the victims' families and their loved ones who were killed on September 11, 2001. And that's why people like myself and DJ Thermal Detonator and Sean Russell and Darren Harvey and Ben and Eric from Project Renew American Century and Jonathan Bellasord will continue to report to you the latest updates. And of course, the man who has been just relentless in his reporting, who I think is the best and single best reporter regarding 9/11 right now, Dan Christensen of the Florida Bulldog. I thank you so much for the article, and thank you guys for watching. I will see you. And of course, if there's any updates, any breaking news, you will hear it from me without bias, without prejudice. See you in the next video, guys. Take care.